irie, but in a minute could get real scary. Open your eyes, let me tell you where we come from. Trinidad and Tobago Islands. And we not even Jamaican, but the dancehall scene, yeah, we shut down. And everything, yeah, irie, but in a minute could get real scary. Anywhere we go now, missing people on the news, and the boy them on the floor now. Blood running, can't stop it. Flow, boy gunning, small rocket. Woo, black life and a small topic. No, police outside and not stop it. No, try tell me that is part of it. No. And I want to share with you tonight. Share with you tonight. There's still beauty in our eyes. Open your eyes. Let me start with the roots where we come from. Africa, brought to a paradise island, Bago. Peaceful people, but real radical. Warrior heart, clean, pretty like a rainbow. Link up with a sister isle named Trinidad, West Indian, beat the pan. I know you know the name though. Come and take a lime and a wine for carnival. Have a lemonade and unwind in Tobago, in Tobago. Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, Tobago, I love you so. Tobago, I love you so.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Tobago Civil Net series on turning the tide on crime and violence here in Tobago. Now, as we know, there has been a huge surge in the number of crimes that we've seen on the island of Tobago in recent time. You know, something that many persons call unprecedented. And now there's something that we all have to do. There's a role that we all have to play. And this four-part series being held by the Tobago Civil Net, sponsored by Eastern Credit Union, is part of a larger agenda for each and every person to take their own personal accountability for what we do to fight against crime and violence in our communities. Now, the sessions have begun since last week, where we had on Tuesday, actually, November the 12th, we had that session that was so impactful. It was really entertaining as well as insightful with Mr. Quincy Joseph. That one was hosted by Xavier Edwards. And the interviewer for that session was actually Castle Campbell. And I want to send a special good evening out to those persons who were a part of that discussion last week. They really did start off the program on a high. So much so that this evening I'm here and I know that I have large shoes to fill. Amazing job. So much so that I was like, sir, when you set the bar this high, what must I do next week now? But we are very proud of the work that we as an organization, the Tobago Civil Net, has been able to do with very little resources. And now, if you don't know, the Tobago Civil Net is a registered non-partisan organization, meaning there's no political affiliation here, but just a group of civil society members that have come together to try their best to echo the sentiments of Tobago and have a realistic impact on how policies are structured for the overall development of the island. So far, the organization has facilitated discussion on good governance, health, education, and all areas of democracy that impacts how we as a society can shape policy. Because I mean, it's one thing to have governments to set policy that are deemed to be in the best interest of the public, or we call it in the public interest. But there is the other element where we as a society must come together, have the discussion, and have our voices heard, so that when we make a point or we offer a suggestion, we can do it because we are backed by the data. And what is the data? The data is the culmination of voices. So every time you comment on this session, every time you like, every time you share, you are adding to the data that we are collating now. We have at the Tobago CivilNet have been able to facilitate a number of surveys. We had the performance survey on the current administration. We have had surveys on Tobago autonomy. All the conversations that are relevant to the forward movement of Tobago and the island, and having individuals feel like they have a true part to play in the development, and that the development is not just happening as a means of a top-down approach, but we as a society having a true, real voice in matters. And one of those matters is crime and violence on the island. And today we are having a session with a powerhouse, a man that has created a space, or we call it riding in his own lane. He has created a lane for himself. And this is no other than Dr. David Mohammed. A number of persons may know him from his series and his Black Agenda project. I'm going to make sure I do him justice by letting you know that Dr. David Mohammed holds an PhD in sociology and a double major degree in sociology and education at that, right? And this is from the University of the West Indies. He also holds a teacher's diploma for the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and is a part-time lecturer at Roy Tech, where he heads the education department. He is the founder and the director, again, of the Black Agenda Project. That's the one where, we're scrolling through Instagram, we're scrolling through Facebook, and we hear such a powerful man with such a powerful message about how Black and colored folks have a part to play in standing up and, having our voices heard. He has launched the Padmore Boys Academy, teaching discipline, conflict resolution, and life skill to boys 17 years and under. David Mohammed is also fondly called, and also Brother David, as he's also fondly called. And he also operates an online radio station that has a strong media presence, and other stations you might often hear him on, like 91.9 FM, Gael, Flow, and Channel 107. Now, Dr. David Mohammed is the Trinidad and the Eastern Caribbean representative of the Nation of Islam. Brother David, as he's often called, has lectured extensively across Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, the UK, Canada, and the US. He has traveled extensively and is the former and longest serving manager of the Trinidad and Tobago national senior men's football team, also known as the Soca Warriors. And he is the holder of a second degree, black belting jiu-jitsu, karate, and a qualified, very important people, VIP bodyguard. And in 2006, along with his colleagues, he launched the Black Caucus, which enlisted a membership of over 800 persons within the first week. This was followed by the Black Agenda Project that, again, we know him for, which was launched in 2012. He was then listed as one of the top 10 personalities of the year in 2013 by the New York-based Caribbean People's newspaper. On the same day, he was featured in the UK Gleaner newspaper based in England, speaking on Caribbean unity. In 2013, he also performed his Hajj, the pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. Ladies and gentlemen, an extensive bio like this demands for us to not only sit and watch, but engage in an entertaining but insightful and practical discussion on tools that can be utilized for us as a society, not only to change the way how we view youths, crime, the things that cause young persons to get into crime and violence, how the prison system is structured, the type of corrective mechanisms that can be used to rehabilitate persons who have formerly had a life of crime. But this discussion is meant to also educate, but it cannot be a discussion if we are talking to ourselves. And so this is the reason why we are asking that throughout this discussion, you put your comments in the comments section, be a part of a live interactive discussion. And the more you like, the more you share, the more persons are going to be able to see and interact and be a part of this. We are now giving you this little period for you to share the live, share it to your group chats, share it to your status, just repost it and allow for the right ears to hear everything that we're going to be talking about this evening. And before I bring on our feature speaker this evening, I just want to say a special thank you to an organization that has stepped forward to ensure that the work that Tobago CivilNet is doing can continue to go forth in a non-partisan way. And that is no other organization than the Eastern Credit Union. We want to thank you for your support during this time. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, having a hearty discussion. I mean, I am relaxed. I hope you are relaxed because this is one of those chats that's gonna suck you in. You know, you sit down and you're like, I don't know where the time went. So, Dr. David Mohammed, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, my beloved sister, and thank you for your very kind and thoughtful words. And I look forward to our conversation as well.
Right. Now, like myself, many persons may know you from scrolling through social media and hearing this guy say, we as a people need to we need to unite, right? That's where we know you from, but we don't know the backstory or some of the work that you have actually done on the ground off of social media that has kind of led to you taking the Black Agenda project online. I mean, we're in a social media age, so you have to move with the times. But what have you been doing on the ground? I kind of touched on most of it in your bio, but let the people know.
Well, just to give, and once again, I express my gratitude for the opportunity to share some thoughts in this forum, especially with a perspective on Tobago. Just to speak of within recent times, we recently, for the beginning of Black History Month in Trinidad and Tobago, which is the month of November, we once again reestablished the foundation base of our membership at the Kwame Ture Center, the membership of the Black Agenda Project organization, where we established 9 simultaneously working action groups or ministries, which are health and human services, agriculture, education, security, arts and culture, business, justice, information, and science and technology. These 9 groups are each launching simultaneous initiatives, including many that have already been in motion. We have a free lessons program for CXC students in 7 O-level subjects at our building. We have the Black Business Expos, where we bring together entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized Black-owned businesses. We try to make our lawyers available to give free legal advice to those within our community who need it. We have had a very successful agricultural program where we are growing our own food. And this is right in the heart of East Port of Spain, Laventille. Within the last couple of years or so, we would have grown several hundreds of heads of lettuce, tomatoes, okras, pigeon peas, peppers, melon gems, many pak choys, and many other stuff. And we also have a health clinic at our building on Thursdays, headed by Dr. Desmond Phillips. So we have our own security force, self-defense and martial arts training as well. And we're looking to engage in a project for the first time through our Arts and Culture Committee, where we want to re-establish the African heritage in Carnival. So in the third week of February, we'll be having 4 days of activities with our conscious calypso, steel band music, the oral traditions, the kind of talk tent forum where our history will be shared, consciousness will be shared, the true story of liberation will be shared. But in particular, one element of Carnival that you're unlikely to hear anywhere else, and that is the economics of Carnival, where those who are the true talented artisans, performers, writers, and pioneers of the culture themselves are impoverished when the season is over, and those who don't even appreciate our culture are empowered and made even richer. So these are just a few of the initiatives that we're currently, everything that I just said is current, but we continue to work, and we're already looking forward so much to 2025 to continue along that vein.
Excellent. And in your discussion with me this evening, you have decided to focus on the untold truth about how society has failed to develop.
Yeah.
Now, I have a number of questions, but before we get into my questions, I'm just going to allow you to do your introduction and give us a bit of a backstory on why you believe, based on your research and the work that you have been doing at the community level, throughout the region and in the UK, in Canada, also connected to looking at crime and violence from a social, public health approach.
Yeah.
Give us that entire overview.
Yeah. Well, here in 2024, as we approach the end of 2024, we are already nearing another record high murder rate. It is mainly our young people who are both the victims and the perpetrators. This is not just in our society, but we see a consistent universal pattern of young males of African descent being in central focus when it comes to both being victims and perpetrators of violent crimes, but also in the organization of gangs. Now, we don't believe that it is coincidental that anywhere you find these urban capital city centers, on the periphery of them are densely populated residential spaces that tend to have an infiltration of illegal firearms and illegal narcotics, of which the importation of such are in no way whatsoever linked to the persons who are reprimanded, apprehended, arrested, incarcerated, and sentenced for being in possession of them or even using these illegal items. We don't believe that the pattern that we see and have seen over the last 12 months, over the last 12 years, and really since the millennium began, that it's the exact same thing in Jamaica. the exact same thing in so many of these cities in America. It's the exact same thing now in some of the main capital cities in Europe, in even some of the smaller parts of the Caribbean. So if it's not a coincidence that you have these identical patterns of conflict that result in bloodshed, and then there also appears to be a very scripted response from politicians who have been entrusted with authority, with, again, it's the same kind of pressured talk to the public, designed and crafted in such a way to bring about a sense of security or safety, and that this same template exists in so many different places. Now, we know that if you roll a dice 10 times, and on each of those 10 occasions it falls on the same number, the mathematical law of probability, which also governs the science of life, is defied there, and there has to be some deliberate manipulation or interference in that process. Therefore, it cannot be that everywhere that our young people are, and we've seen the pattern in Trinidad, and now it's being established in a similar way in Tobago, our first and main point is that it is not by accident. If it's not by accident, not by coincidence, or not by mistake, we now have to consider the other variables or factors that are present in each of these simultaneous equations. And everywhere we look, we see unequal distribution of wealth, political rhetoric that attempts to instill hope in politicians who convince us that the rationale behind supporting them is because the opposition to them are so wretched, wicked, evil, corrupt, and unworthy that we have no hope whatsoever but to follow them. And then when you listen to their opponents are saying the same thing about us or them. We see that, and we also see those who apparently seem to be living above the law or above the radar, free from prosecution of involvement in white-collar crimes or white-collar organized criminal activity on the ground level, which is being masked through money laundering agencies fronting as legitimate businesses. This is not in one place or two places or three places. This is what is referred to in sociology as criminogenic capitalism, whereby in the normal, natural, everyday, ordinary running of affairs in corrupt business, it breeds a dismantling of the stability of the underclass in these communities, and guns and drugs find their way in, and you see the consequences of the presence of those issues in the community, and then you see the results. Again, it's in Trinidad and Tobago, it's in Jamaica, it's in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. It's now even in London, England, with our Black youth in the so-called post-code wars. It's in Paris, France. It's in the ghetto areas, or don't talk about South and Central America, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil. And so this consistent pattern, we believe, is a recipe or a formula for the kind of chaos that we're seeing, but there's no political will to condemn that same structure, because it is also what sustains and empowers many of those in the elite or ruling class. So I see that as an overall picture of the situation that we're in, and there is no attempt, I conclude saying this, there's no attempt, neither an effort nor will, to put a stop to that. The society, as in the general public, the general population, is sold a fictitious narrative, and it's part of our national gullibility, how we fall for it. The general public is sold this fictitious narrative that we have been made to believe that if everyone who commits a crime is locked away, put in prison, then crime will stop. That has, of all of the untruths ever told by any politicians, anywhere, at any time, that one is probably the one that they're most heavily dependent upon to keep the criminogenic capitalism operating as it is, but it's also the one that has demonstrated our vulnerability and gullibility to believe it. That you take everyone in a gang, everyone who sells drugs, and everyone who carries a gun, and you put all of them in prison. We have been seduced and brainwashed into believing that crime will end without us facing the reality that if you lock away every criminal, the conditions of social inequality, social exclusion, poverty and unemployment, broken homes, dysfunctional families, faulty parenting, negative peer group influences, and educational underachievement, those factors will still be present. So if you put every criminal in jail, it won't be too long before we would have replicated those same conditions, because the variables still exist and there's no effort whatsoever to put a stop to that. And only when we take this holistic approach on the ground level will we see some kind of change in that direction.
I mean, I'm glad that you began by highlighting what's happening within the prison system and how that in itself does not solve the problem, because you brought out the concept of going from school to prison. And so what specific factors in Trinidad and the Trinidad and Tobago's education system do you think contributes to this school to prison pipeline, and how can these be mitigated at the community and national levels?
Yes, extremely important. Now, this concept of the school to prison pipeline, which again is observed in so many different societies, is fueled by two sets of factors. And educational underachievement within itself is generated by these two groups of factors. So you have one set being referred to as external factors to the education system, and the other internal factors to the educational system. But the internal factors are the ones that are completely ignored. The external factors are the poverty, poor housing, bad diet, could be overcrowded residential spaces, even bad lighting, unemployment of parents. Issues outside of the school system that contribute towards the failure of students. But there are also internal factors within the educational system that also contribute towards the failure of students. Now, one would think, how on earth can there be factors inside the school system that could contribute towards failures? But all of these are issues that are being addressed with so many efforts and attempts to fix. Internal factors within the school system stem from negative teacher attitudes, labeling, stereotyping, branding, which now produces the self-fulfilling prophecy with low teacher expectations that are passed on subconsciously to the student, who now sees himself as destined for failure, and a post-colonial ethnocentric curriculum that does not address the necessary motivation required for the Black child. We are having a series of events in Trinidad for African History Month in November 2024. But I also did a number of presentations in schools in England for Black History Month out there, which is October. And what is of concern is that, I mean, in the last year in the United Kingdom, I don't want to exaggerate, but I would have been in at least 12 schools, mainly secondary schools, mainly sixth form colleges, but also a couple of primary schools as well. I cannot think of not one school, because we're talking about London, England, where there's a growing African and African Caribbean population. I cannot think of any learning institution where there is not a part of the infrastructure of the school that has been dedicated to Black history. By the fact that you have African children within the school system means that you must ensure that they are connected with their own heritage and legacy from an academic perspective that could give them the kind of inspiration necessary to boost their self-esteem, build on their self-confidence, and give them some kind of ambition designed for future success, where at no point along the way in their educational experiences must they be confronted with the idea that they are destined or doomed to fail. We still have this oversensitivity whereby we feel that empowering the minds of African youth in some way is offensive to other ethnic groups within the same society. Therefore, we shy away from it unless it is the designated holidays of Emancipation Day, where again, we have ads in the newspaper, we have commercials on television, and we have public displays wishing African people happy Emancipation Day. But right after that, the unequal distribution of wealth and resources within the society, and, for example, the blocking of an African bank in Trinidad and Tobago that has been established in almost every other English-speaking Caribbean nation that has been exclusively established to give loans for business empowerment to African entrepreneurs. It is everywhere in the Caribbean, with the exception of Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. When I was doing a number of speaking engagements in Jamaica in August, this was my major theme, that why these two countries, Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, the African Bank is in Barbados, it's in Antigua, it's in Grenada, it's in St. Vincent, in Lucia, St. Kitts, it's in Dominica, it's in the Bahamas, but not Trinidad and Tobago and not Jamaica. Does that possibly have anything to do with the out of control inordinate crime rates that these two countries have, where the governments are so dedicated, sincere, and loyal to the empowerment of Caribbean white business interests, who they have testified openly by policy that they intend to help continue getting richer? So all of the African businessmen, going back to the research of Professor Selwyn Ryan in 2013 in his publication on Black entrepreneurship, the African experience in Trinidad and Tobago, that it is as if the state wants us to wear the nice clothes, wear the beautiful African colors, beat the drums, dance, get some small temporary contracts, but leave the economy, leave the money, we leave the wealth, and leave the entrepreneurship up to the so-called 1% community, while we are to be ready, available, and willing as cheap labor for them. Meanwhile, our children are the ones who are joining gangs, feeling as if their backs are against the wall, under heavy economic hardship and pressure, and feeling a sense of social exclusion within the society. And then the combination of all of these factors and forces together, we begin to see again this pattern which goes across the board. So we tend to look at the surface of the problem, but we're not getting deep enough inside. And I sincerely believe that if we can, again, the whole idea of the public health approach, because the sickness in question is also in the minds of policymakers who put plasters over a gunshot wounds with the kind of temporary legislation that they create, but really not getting down into the grassroots interaction with our young people in particular.
Right. And even as you touched on that now, with reference made to our first session with Mr. Quincy Joseph, he would have
Yeah.
spoken about his experience in the prison system and young persons, and the fact that although crime does pay, the tax is really too high. But from your perspective and your interaction with youths from different parts of the world, what do you think truly makes, the crime and the gang violence so much more attractive to youths today, especially the ones in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, that's the whole thing right there when it comes to what makes it attractive and what's becoming more and more attractive. So criminal behavior is largely committed by those who have formed a subculture out of the mainstream culture of society because they've recognized themselves as being victims of this social exclusion. So you have a concept in sociology called deviance amplification spiral, which is a series of studies that were done in societies and cities with high crime rates that have looked at the way, for example, that the media has handled coverage of crime. So if I am seen as some kind of outcast, or I am rejected from the system, or I have failed in school and I am underachieving, then naturally I would want to gravitate towards those in similar circumstances as myself. And then when I, having underachieved or failed within the system, now have a new peer group within which I'm finding social worth, value, and a sense of belonging and acceptance. So now that we formed a new group of outcasts or outsiders, we now have our own norms and values, traditions, mores, and folkways. And we have now formed a subculture. And just like in society's mainstream culture, where there's a system of positive and negative sanctions or rewards and punishments for favorable or unfavorable behaviors, the favorable behaviors in the criminal subculture now become committing more crime. So if I commit a robbery or do a shooting or a wounding or an assault and battery, I am seen as establishing some additional self-worth in my negative circle. But then the outside of that subculture, mainstream media, social media, all of the speeches by politicians about we're going to crack down on them and it's us versus them. I remember in the past themes such as Operation Anaconda and Operation Weed and Seed, and it's us versus them, and we are coming for you. Don't fear God, but fear the commissioner. And we have even seen the Prime Minister in Jamaica giving a speech that was very strongly worded in threat to those who find themselves on the fringe of criminal behavior. What many such persons fail to understand is with the concept of deviance amplification spiral, that when that negative criminal behavior is sensationalized and used as a vehicle for rhetoric and propaganda, and it becomes public, then it actually inadvertently encourages more criminal behavior to come out of those circles, because that's where the attention is coming from. That's where the recognition is coming from. That is how one, as the term is used in the street, gets their stripes. So the same way that a general or a commander or a sergeant in a military administration or structure or hierarchy can earn medals, checkers, and stripes for his achievement in meeting the warfare or battle objectives of his institution, likewise, in the street gangs or institutions, there is also a system of positive sanctioning or rewarding where they also get their stripes, or as they say, notches on the gun, which comes from committing more crime. So they have observed that there's no attempt whatsoever to bring them in, meet them halfway, try to make situations or have these situations include some kind of forum through which they could engage or interface with authorities in national security. Once they've seen that society has completely disconnected them, then you've completely disconnected the hope. And the sad thing about our society in particular is you have these choruses of cheering squads who, in a cowardly manner, stay behind a curtain and spew out so much bitterness, hatred for the youth, loathing. You hear from segments of our national community persons expressing public sentiments on social media, such as they should just drop a bomb on where they live. They should just kill all of them. Or they should just round all of them up, including the innocent relatives, friends, bystanders, cousins, brothers, sisters, associates. They should just snatch all of them off the street, throw them in the jail, lock them up, throw away the key. That is amplified. Now, if I am living in the midst of two persons who are involved in crime and I am doing my best to have a positive influence on their lives, and I'm hearing that from the general public, and occasionally it even spills out of the mouth of some of the politicians, how am I to interpret that except to further withdraw myself, further reestablish myself in the depth of my own social circle, and forget that I was ever even part of this society that is now at its wits' end in fear because of the crime rate? So there has to be a meeting of the minds on all levels.
Right. And even as we touched on the education system and how the school has tendencies or can create cracks that inevitably create a school to prison pipeline.
Yes.
Idea of juvenile delinquency continues to come to the forefront. And so what are some of the most significant factors that you think stimulate juvenile delinquency in Trinidad and Tobago? And what role would you say the family dynamic and peer influence plays on juvenile delinquency?
Yes. Now, many of my students in the education and sociology and psychology programs that I lecture in are given research assignments in groups to go out and collect data and do research on juvenile delinquency, truancy, disruptive behaviors, causes of crime, effects of poverty in our society, etc. When it comes to juvenile delinquency, There have been a number of studies done from as far back as the 1970s. In fact, the first one that I'm aware of was one by the famous Desmond Carty, who became a government minister in Dr. Eric Williams's government. That was 1972 on juvenile delinquency within the school system in Trinidad and Tobago. And you have had a number of them. Abigail Montague, there has been quite a few. And I mean, I was quite familiar with all of them when I was doing my own research into juvenile delinquency, my own qualitative and quantitative research on the topic. Now, the genesis, it is believed, of the juvenile delinquency problem within our school system is largely linked to our post-colonial sovereignty and our existence as a new nation. Very, very quickly, going back to 150 or so years ago, when the education system started in Trinidad and Tobago in the mid-1800s, there was a education officer from the United Kingdom who came here on behalf of the colonial government to do a report to decide on whether or not a national educational system should be established in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, Trinidad at the time, before we were combined. And one of the reasons that there was this commission report on whether or not there should be an educational system in Trinidad was because basically the whites in Trinidad, who were the landowners, who had inherited land and property and money after enslavement was abolished and emancipation came. So the local white population were given a tremendous head start, as well as unjustifiably being given land and money and institutions. Around that time, they were very adamant and defiant against African people getting an education. If we read the early colonial history of Trinidad and Tobago, published by persons such as Professor Bridget Brereton, in her two books, Early and Modern History of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Donald Woods, Trinidad in Transition, the great Dr. Carl Campbell, who passed away recently, who used to teach the Caribbean Civilization course at the University of the West Indies, of course, Professor Selwyn Ryan, on social stratification in Trinidad and Tobago. Even people like Daniel Seagal and so many other historians on Trinidad history, they took note that the white population in Trinidad did not want Africans to get an education, but they lobbied for African people having an agricultural education. And hence there were a couple agricultural colleges that were built at the beginning of the early 1900s, late 1800s. Let's fast forward 100 years or so later to our independence around 1962. When Dr. Eric Williams had the idea of establishing a universal secondary school system, once again, the local white community were very adamant against it. As a matter of fact, and I speak about this on several occasions, there was a front page Guardian newspaper with Dr. Eric Williams's face being placed over the face of Adolf Hitler of Germany. And the reason that they put Hitler's face over Dr. Eric Williams's face is because they were accusing Dr. Eric Williams of being a dictator for putting all poor people's children in secondary schools because, again, the local white community felt that it would be unfair to them if poor Black people got an education, because technically you get a secondary education, it positions you to become the future managers, supervisors, administrators, leaders, captains of industry, which were positions that were reserved for their children. So they met with Dr. Eric Williams and basically told him, you cannot do this. Dr. Eric Williams came to a compromise. This would have been the early 1960s. And I say to us, shockingly, that compromise is still in place today. And it will be in place next year in 2025 as well. And that no prime minister that we've ever had, from Dr. Eric Williams to George Chambers to A.N.R. Robinson to Basdio Pandey to Patrick Manning to Kamla Persad-Bissessar to Dr. Keith Rowley and every single minister of education in between dare not touch that compromise where the elite, the wealthy people's children can go on a 20% list for the secondary schools, the top prestige secondary schools in the country, the top colleges and convents. And this is why every year again, we have the poor Black child from Laventille who gets close to 100% in maths, English, and creative writing, but they send them to a government secondary school. And you have the white child from down in the West who gets around 60 or 70% in the same maths and English and goes to the top colleges and convents. Their names go down on a list. And again, I say shockingly that everyone knows that's unfair. You sit down and have a conversation with anyone in government, opposition, past, present, they all know it is unfair. Fine, if you want to take children who failed the SEA or Common Entrance Exam and put them in the top schools, okay, if that's what you want to do, that's your business. But to deny those poor, bright, brilliant African children who live in areas of East Port of Spain in particular, Mova, Laventille, Beetham, Sealots, East Port of Spain, along the East-West corridor, San Fernando, Tobago, and everywhere in between. If you're going to deny them just so that you can place, quote unquote, 1% people's children in those prestige schools, how does that augur now for these poor but very bright children who have been denied these opportunities and now have to go back into communities or into schools that might not be up to their level of expectation as far as what they know they can achieve is concerned? And that begins the failure that not the children have encountered, but the failure that the state has done to our nation's children. And it is all a recipe or a breeding ground for juvenile delinquency, in addition to the other factors that combine with some of those internal factors within the school.
No, Dr. Mohammed, even in this discussion that we're having here, as you indicated before, the attractiveness of gang violence and juvenile delinquency and the entire education system, the people want to know by means of their submission of the question online, what is the solution? And in addition to that, my question would be, I mean, there are persons who would sit watching this and say, okay, well, I'm glad you say Black and brown children, because in today's society, a lot of the issues that you are raising are not specific to Africans alone. You hear some of the lower income members of the East Indian community often complaining about the same thing when it comes to the allocation in terms of where their children are being placed. So the argument might be raised, is it truly something about race, or is it about economic status? And you did indicate the children of the 1%, because we're not going to deny that these schools also have Black and brown children. But is it that we're focusing in on a matter of economics as opposed to a matter of race?
I'm glad you asked that. I reject the position, and I say this with all due respect to anyone who may see things from a different angle, but I reject the position that, for example, is said in reference to, say, the 1%, that it is both Africans and Indians who are equally victims of the elitism that filters through the economy, as well as, by extension, other social matters. I don't share that view. And I know that it is a view that is promoted, because when I say some of the things that I am saying, it is responded to many times by persons saying, well, it's divisive. In this country, we are all one, we are all together, we all live together, etc., etc. No, I see the value in the sentiments, but I reject that position for three main reasons. One, when it comes to our political reality, now look at this. More than 25 years ago, I used to do these 5-minute commentaries on Power 102 FM. And if we really dig into the archives, we could find from 25 years or so ago, where I did a commentary suggesting that we build, the state, new prestige government colleges for young men of African descent. And I recommended the government building the Kwame Ture Boys College, as well as the Dr. Eric Williams Boys College, as well as the Audrey Jeffers Girls High School, or the Elmer Francois Girls High School, or the Hazel Scott Girls High School, etc. Now, and first of all, I don't believe in the political system. Anyone who knows me knows that about me. But when the first Indian government came into office under Mr. Pandey, with immediate effect, they addressed that situation of creating new prestige schools for Indian children. So all of our children were being sent to the junior, secondary, senior comprehensive schools. A lot of their children were being sent to the same junior, secondary, and senior comprehensive schools. But as soon as their government came into office, they established the Vishnu Boys Hindu College, the Shiva Boys Hindu College, the Parvati Girls Hindu Girls High School, and even the Lakshmi Girls, which was already a school in existence on the private level, was supported by the state. You also had the new Astra Girls and Astra Boys colleges and high schools. Here you have a multitude of high-level, high-prestige, new secondary schools for Indian children. An African government or African politicians in offices simply will not and do not think like that. They are more busy trying to please and support, again, the local Caribbean white elitist ethnic minorities, to empower them while they come back to tell us it's one love, it's rainbow country. Here every creed and race finds an equal place. It's all about total equality. So they have established new prestige secondary schools for their children. African children were never a part of that. Secondly, you have a situation whereby when our children are paraded all over the newspapers, put on the news, publicly shamed, scorned, mocked, and ridiculed as a people, when African youth are under the microscope being disrespected and degraded by all segments of the community, no one stands in solidarity with us. Absolutely no one stands side by side with African people and says, okay, you are our brothers. We are standing in solidarity with you in condemnation of the discrimination and the criticism that's coming against your youth. No, we stand alone. And you know what makes it even worse? Many of our own people who are trying so desperately hard to win acceptance and camaraderie with those other ethnic groups also join their choruses and also call for the total erasure, sentencing, and locking up of our own Black youth. So when it comes to that, we have no friends. When it comes to, yeah, African people getting reparations for slavery, right, other people will join on to that cause and say, we are your brothers and we
Dr.
are your
Mohammed,
sisters.
we have someone online that's asking, Dr. Mohammed, in what category then would you place the rich non-whites among us, i.e., the rich East Indians?
But it's not for me to place anyone in any category. It's not for me to attempt to define or brand or label anyone. I'm not doing that. And I have not done that. And if that is what someone is hearing from my words, they're extracting that through the process of elimination out of the guilty culprits who are standing on the sideline. I am simply speaking about our situation. Now, remember, and I say to that beloved person who would have sent that message, remember, beloved, we live in a society where there's a Chinese association, there's a Syrian Lebanese association, there's a East Indian Diwali Nagar site. You even have Portuguese Heritage Day. But it is as if African people are not even given permission to unite, pool their resources, settle their differences, come together on the basis of what they have in common, and form skills banks and think tanks. We need masters' permission to do that, or else we will be accused of being racist. Do you know on the Eastern Main Road in St. Joseph, there's the Chinese Baptist Church. On Charlotte Street in Port of Spain, you have Chinatown. But if I were to go to Henry Street and suggest the African town or African, but again, it will be called racism because
Dr.
the
Mohammed,
disempowerment of African people represents some kind of prosperity for others.
yeah, I'm glad that you brought it to that perspective when you look at the general Trinidad and Tobago context, because
I'm talking about reality.
We have a number of different ethnicities residing in Trinidad and Tobago. But if we zoom in on a Tobago context of, the solution to this juvenile delinquency and youth gangs and what really attracts young persons to that culture, in comparison to Tobago, the dynamic is very different from Trinidad. So when we talk about solutions, and I don't know if we can just contextualize it as this is the solution for Black and brown kids when Tobago is predominantly of African descent. And when we see a number of the criminal activities happening on the island, it is the boys and girls within that demographic, but there isn't much to compare it to other than to juxtapose it to what's happening in Trinidad. So is it that they are mirroring what they are seeing in Trinidad without the cultural context that has shaped the activity in Trinidad. So you would have brought to the forefront, well, listen, these are the dynamics and the environmental factors that play a crucial role in what shape the young Black men and women to be boxed in, where they literally have to fight their way out of this system. But can you agree with me in saying that Tobago youths may be following a path without the adequate cultural and environment context to go along with it? So basically, they are adapting a struggle that's not even theirs.
Yes. Now, when it comes to Tobago, and within recent times, especially the growing crime problem that is there, we see both similarities and differences with Trinidad. The similarities are, first of all, that it is a globalized culture. So while Trinidad and Trinidadians are having a negative impact on Tobago, that's very difficult to deny. However, the Trinidadians who are responsible for a negative influence on Tobago are also themselves being negatively influenced by other external, now globalized cultures. Also, both Tobago and Trinidad are operating under the same economy. And it is the same unequal distribution of wealth and resources that our people in Tobago are victims of, is the same unequal distribution of resources and skewed policy that the African community in Trinidad are victims of. So those are similarities. The difference, I would say, in the wisdom of my teacher, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, has pointed out that wherever there is a crisis among our Black youth, it's linked to us not having a knowledge of self. I remember a very interesting experience I had in Tobago some time ago. I was on a morning television program. Oh, this is about 8 or 9 years ago. And it was a lesson for me, honestly. I was on a morning television program. Can't remember which station it was, but basically I thought it was unavailable in Tobago. But I criticized one particular item in the Tobago Heritage Festival. It would have been in July, I think. I criticized the fact that Tobago, in their heritage celebrations, had a calendar event titled Rum Shop Line. And I was making the point that at no point in our history was the consumption of rum part of our heritage. And if we're going to celebrate that we are actually celebrating a pastime that our slave masters encouraged us to engage in order for us to be less productive when it comes to serving and developing ourselves, building our own homes and establishing our own communities, but remaining loyal, faithful servants to him. In Tobago, there is such a rich heritage that the average Tobagonian youth does not know about in the same way that the average Trinidadian youth does not know about his heritage. Tobago has had 4 successful enslavement revolutions and rebellions, while Trinidad has had none. Tobago has switched hands between different European powers 33 times, when Trinidad arguably only switched hands twice. Tobago has had a revolutionary spirit, which developed into a spirit of entrepreneurship that we see also in Grenada on a massive scale, which you just don't see among African people in Trinidad to the same scale. There are so many lessons that African people in Trinidad can learn from African people in Tobago. But if our youth are not being taught their history, their heritage, their legacy, then they're disconnected from a source of ideological empowerment, which could give them a completely different focus for the future. As I have asked, and I've spoken in at least 200 occasions in secondary schools all across Trinidad and Tobago. And I've actually done more addresses in secondary schools in Tobago over the last 2 years than I have even in Trinidad. I've had probably in the last 2 years, maybe about 15 or so speaking engagements in secondary schools in Tobago, whereas in Trinidad, I have not done that much. But think about this. How could African people be the originators, the writers of the alphabet, developers of the number system, inventors of mathematics, algebra, geometry, and arithmetic, the pioneers of science, physics, chemistry, and biology? How could we build the pyramids in Egypt, Sudan, all across East and Northeast Africa? That we built, African people, the first towns, cities, villages, civilizations, and we African people built the world's first colleges, libraries, universities, and learning institutions. And we African people had reservoirs and deposits of gold and diamonds that we will give as charity to other countries. And we African people would have built the first hospitals in the world, the first community centers, medical clinics, offices of administration and political governance, all created by African. How could African people have this great history and not one African child goes to school and learns any of that just shared with you? How could you have all of that great history and an education system, but the education system does not share not one sentence of it? That is us contributing towards the own ideological self-destruction of our own people.
And even as you brought up that Tobago Heritage Festival, would you say that as a society, Tobago has failed the youth culturally?
I don't think that we can identify any society in the Western Hemisphere, and by extension in particular in the Caribbean, that has a capitalist economic system, a political structure that mirrors the Westminster politics of our former colonizers and enslavers, and a social culture that promotes, for commercial purposes, alcohol and disrespect of women. I don't think that any society that fits that description can be described as not failing our youth. The failure of African youth has been consistent, it has been patterned, it has been institutional, and now it's normalized. And so this is why there must be some kind of grassroots movement from the ground up to address these issues.
We have a number of other questions as well, so I just want to make sure
Yes.
that we get the audience engaged in the conversation.
Of course.
Someone is saying here that that's a huge problem for teenagers to constantly hear negativity about their identity, race, culture, and social economic status. Identify development is most important. Identity
Yeah,
development is most important as children are transitioning into adulthood. Identity
exactly.
inferiority, this person is saying. And if teens do not feel well, they then do behave well. So if they don't feel well, they don't behave well. So
Yeah.
that negative self-image has a key impact on their behavior. So if all they're hearing is that, okay, as Black and African children, we are disproportionate and we are at the bottom of the spectrum and all of that, that impacts their self-image and thus leading to a negative impact on their behavior.
Okay, wait, let me just ask. So the person who's saying that, are they implying that, I don't know, this is why I'm asking. Are they implying that this kind of conversation whereby those factors are highlighted could therefore have a negative impact on the minds of Black children? Is that their
So,
position?
but they will offer a follow-up. But in addition to that, the
No, no,
question,
because the
well,
reason I asked that,
the
right,
contribution also includes the fact that the solution is to promote what is good about our youth in
right.
school, the society. All persons can celebrate their grouping while living in understanding and harmony. So I agree, Blacks should not be left out in doing what works. Alcohol upon children and teens growing brain is very harmful. The science is clear. That's
Right.
about it.
So you have, and I'm not saying or suggesting that the person who raised that is of this mind state. But for example, persons would say in response to a lot of what I would have said, persons would have expressed the view that when a Black man like myself points out the negative, some would say, well, we shouldn't be talking about the negative because that might make the children feel bad. But many times, from the exact same mind state, when you talk the positive, they say, no, that's racism. We're talking about race. We should be bringing everyone together. We should be healing. We should be promoting harmony. So it's almost like a catch-22 situation. Now, I know that that's not necessarily the trend of thought of everyone who brings that up, but that's an important point to make. But on terms of that whole issue of harmony, and really, to be honest, in a society like Trinidad and Tobago, I call it the illusion of inclusion, because I was making 2 points about why I don't purchase wholesale that narrative about it's the Africans and the Indians who are suffering together. So we spoke about how we have no allies, we have no friends when our backs are against the wall and we are being persecuted. Also, we don't have a Afrocentric political consciousness that will seek to bring about development for the African community. As a matter of fact, the African community might be last on the list if there was any kind of ethnic priorities. But the third point, which I did not get to make, was the example of the prison system. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, everyone, persons from all ethnic groups, commit crimes. I have made at least 100 or so visits into the prison over the last couple of decades or so. And the prison population is, in my estimation, at least 90% African. Now, there are so many cases where African youth are hired as hitmen by non-African people, asked to sell drugs and distribute guns by non-African people, as was the case in a Monos Island episode that we are even security guards for the illegal narcotics of non-African people. I used to have a brother wash my car who one day we sat down and had a conversation outside a radio station, and he explained that he went to jail for 5 years for stealing cars. That turned out to be a lengthy conversation because I inquired in depth, who were you stealing these cars for? Some non-African people in Central. Okay, and what came out of this? Did any of them go to jail with you? Did any of them show up in court to give you support? Did they pay for your legal services? No, not one bit. Now you have so many of us who find ourselves in jail, arrested, out on bail or probation, under the radar of law enforcement because of our association with non-African criminals who are not even suspected of being involved in a crime. When it comes to that dimension of reality, there is absolutely no condemnation whatsoever. You know what they say? And you hear it all the time. The only word that's said about that is, but you shouldn't be selling their drugs. This is what African people are told. Non-African people will circulate guns and drugs in the African community. They'll never be condemned for it, but they'll point another finger at the African youth and say, you shouldn't be selling their drugs. You shouldn't be using their guns. And it's like, but is it that we are so disabled from criticizing the source? Is it that we are so disempowered from even condemning the source? And it brings me back, not wanting to go on too much on this, but think of how many people that you know, that I know, that we know together collectively. Think of how many people we know who have been wrongfully arrested for so many different things. But to me, this was an ugly stain on our history, where within the last, I believe it was within the last year, that think of how many illegal guns are on the street. Think of how many firearms are being used in all these hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of murders. I think, while I don't advocate anyone, no one being wrongfully arrested, I could never support that. But based on this current climate, if someone is in the business of circulating guns legally because he has a license, if someone is in the business of circulating guns, I don't see that as such a terrible thing if he is arrested for a day or two in the best interest of the country. But look at it. One white man, one white Trinidadian is arrested in Barbados. And all these politicians from both government and opposition issuing press releases, press statements, press conferences, groveling on their feet in apology to this one white man for wrongfully arresting him to question him about the distribution of guns in the society. Now he's suing the state. And it seems like all the politicians are supporting him. Even in, now, does it get more ridiculous than that? Meanwhile, it could be that some of those same legal guns that he's distributing are ending up illegally in the hands of those who are unlicensed. So right. Is it so outrageous not to question him on that? So again, that is another clear example of the one-sidedness that exists in our society when it comes to addressing this particular problem.
Now, in Tobago, for a long time, we have said that it takes a village to raise a child. And we particularly believe that the village was played a crucial role in raising youth. Even me myself, I grew up in a time where the neighbor could see you doing wrong on the street and discipline you. And
Yes.
so the question is, even in when we look at the Tobago space, what has happened to this culture? And do you think that this, peeling away of this type of cultural practice of the entire community offering that support in raising the child has contributed to the negativity and the surge in crime that we're
Mhm.
seeing?
Yes. And having said all that I have said about structural and institutional failures and forces that have abandoned our youth, the most consequential variable in the apparent demise of our youth is the destruction of our family. The fact that we went from, at one point, these traditional extended family type settings where the village is the family. As the old African proverb says, it takes an entire village to raise a child. We have, as part of our heritage, again, a consistent attempt to rescue the structure of the Black family, because remember, during enslavement, the Black man was used as a stud horse to breed more slaves to be bought and sold for economic purposes for whites. And the Black woman was repeatedly raped by the slave masters, and that this has done intergenerational structural damage to our family systems. And in spite of our attempts to re-engineer that socially to repair it, we have seen the collapse of the village type approach, where every adult in the community is an uncle or an aunt, and every colleague within our own age group is a brother or a sister. And that being lost, again, a lot of it with this westernized influence of the law coming in between the family and its members. So you'll see, for example, how around 2000, corporal punishment was removed from the school system. And I mean, ask anyone in the teaching profession. Part of my job is to teach teachers and help prepare them for the primary school system. And hardly any teacher who's been in the profession for the last 20 years won't be able to tell you of visible changes and challenges that have taken place within the education system, a very visible over decline in discipline. And even then now, in addition to that, you have the oversensitivity of some parents who are reluctant to have their children corrected, and you can't give them wrong all the time because they sometimes would interpret the correction of their children as aggression and frustration on the part of the teacher being ventilated out on their offspring. And that's not right in any situation.
Now,
So
Dr.
that is another
Mohammed,
element that
we
we've
saw
lost.
we saw recently the whole Christmas list situation
Mhm.
where he came to Trinidad and Tobago and exposed the truth that many knew, but a lot of persons did not know it was so glaring.
Yeah.
Do you how not to agree or to disagree, but how do you feel about the opinions that some of the young persons that were featured in his videos shared? I mean, there was even one gang that spoke about being anti-system, being anti-governance, being anti-political. How do you feel about them sharing those type of
Yes.
sentiments that have caused them to draw towards that gang life?
Yeah. In truth and in fact, my own PhD research has taken me through multiple conversations with persons alleged to be in gangs, in the prisons, both condemned, convicted, as well as on remand, in the youth training center, the YTC, the now dismantled St. Michael's Boys, the Santa Rosa Detention Center, Port of Spain Prison, Golden Grove, maximum security, on street corners. And when you collect all of these qualitative responses of young people, one of the first connections that you make between the incoherent dots, one of the first realizations that you come into is that, wait a minute, no one has ever published any of this. No one has ever printed or circulated what these young people have to say. As a matter of fact, we live under a system whereby if a young person does something negative, obscene, destructive, aggressive, abusive, or violent, they will be highly publicized and sensationalized. But if that same young person does something positive, constructive, something admirable, some great achievement or accomplishment, you wouldn't even know their name. But if after achieve that great accomplishment, they turn around and totally submerge themselves into complete negativity, they will become popular again. And the voice of the youth has been censored and silenced. But only when the youth can be shown in a negative light, again, it goes back to that sociological theory of the deviance amplification spiral, where it is as if it's a catalyst to boost the sales for a media industry that is now more competitive than it has ever been before. You think about which newspaper will more likely be sold if there are two newspapers on the stand and one shows someone accepting an award, a trophy, or a medal, and then the other one, someone who they say, now again, I thought, I'm being sarcastic here, of course, but I thought in our system of legality that you had to try someone in a court, either before a magistrate or a judge and jury, before you can determine their guilt or innocence. But if you're poor and you're Black, you can be already tried, media on the front page, and without any court hearing, legal representation, verdict from a jury, or decision by a judge or magistrate, or representation by attorney, they will call you bandit. Straight up. Who says so? Right now, we live under a system where they could kill 3 Black youths, and the news could say they were 3 bandits. How do you know that?
We have some other submissions in our Q&A.
Yes.
Someone is saying, as long as God is culturally and ethnically determined, his existence must be understood and come to terms with, and one may further argue that putting an ethnicity on God may even be necessary for ex-colonials, Blacks, in which the colonial experience has shaped our perception, our culture, and our history. So, person is saying some must see our own ethnic image in God to embrace other ethnic representation of God must lead to a crisis of self. An image of a white God predisposes our acceptance, I believe, of white power, one in which the wielders of power are of the same race with God.
That's some loaded wisdom right there. Trust me. And I want to commend the person who sent that message.
All right. And as we round up the discussion this evening,
Yes.
we are looking at proposed solutions
Yes.
for the surge in crime we're seeing in Tobago. So, in your closing, tell us what are some of the important policies or directions that you think the Tobago House of Assembly, even in the idea of creating the Tobago Police Service and a number of other ideas that came to the forefront. We saw when that surge in murders began happening, there were a number of press conferences and strategy meetings and new strategy implementation to combat crime. What are you now suggesting, and is there any alignment with what's been said by some of the politicians in the space as well as the police commissioner?
Right. Now, let me just say, as I close, first of all, thanks so much once again. And I'm going to rattle off some solutions, but let me also say, I don't want it to come across like I don't like politicians and police officers. That's actually ridiculous because I do have friends who are politicians. They might not be as available while they're in office, but I can assure you that just before they went into office and after they come out of office, we will be friends. Right? And of course, I have a very good working relationship with the police. I've done multiple presentations, especially in Tobago, with the Roxborough Youth Club and some of the officers who would have accompanied me on some of the school tours that we've done from 2022, 2023, and 2024. It's the system that I'm against. So regarding solutions, we have come up with 6 categories of solutions. And then I'll just microscopically zoom in to the particular or specific ones that we have most faith in. Those 6 categories of solutions to the problem of crime, particularly as it pertains to our youth, are 1, a massive government investment drive, pumping capital into those needed areas and spaces. 2, a transformation of the school system. 3, refocusing and interfacing with gangs on the state level. 4, youth development. 5, prison reform. And 6, the expansion of tertiary education. Now, this massive government-sponsored investment drive must be in neighborhoods that are so-called marginalized or disenfranchised. The transformation of the school system must be inspiration-driven. We must incorporate Black studies on the curriculum and include those motivational and inspirational elements of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that can empower African children. As far as the gang crisis is concerned, we must recognize its infiltration tentacles within the school system as well as outside the school system. The youth development, mentorship, intervention strategies cannot be done exclusively by the state. there are many unsung heroes of youth consciousness in this country. Unfortunately, in our society, we tend to, or governments tend to try to scramble together those who support their party. And out of that small circle, try to offload opportunities on them in exchange or gratitude for the service that they would have gotten, while they end up excluding the best qualified and the most highly experienced in the necessary areas. That is political failure. Now, we have decided that we as an organization, the Black Agenda Project, and me as a student of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, we don't believe in complaining, arguing, fussing, quarreling, spending all our time in condemnation. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, we must get up and do for self or suffer the consequences. And as far as our relationship with God is concerned, we believe that we must get down and say our prayers, but when we're finished, we must get up and go and answer them, because there is no mystery God that when we pray, give us this day our daily bread, that the bread is going to fall out of the sky. We must teach our young people the culture of agriculture and the science of agricultural science. We have to teach them food production means food security, and food security means national security. If 1 million poor people grow, or if 1,000 poor people grow $1,000 worth of food in a poor community in 1 year, that's $1 million in added food security, which would be $1 million less in petty street crimes. There must be the continued establishment of early childhood care and education centers, homework centers, modern state-of-the-art community centers, and recreational facilities. We, in recognizing the need for that, built one ourselves. And instead of marching, picketing, and complaining about other agencies and institutions not doing enough, we decided to take up the mantle again, unite with our own people, settle our differences, pool our resources, and set a plan of action in motion. And now we go out to achieve those goals and objectives. So if this could be a national pattern, that all of us adopt the culture of stop waiting for a check. So many people are doing social work in our society, and I'm not condemning them. I'm not condemning them. But so many people in our society are doing social work in exchange for funding. And if there is no funding, there will be no work in those regards. We have never received a cent from the state in any funding. We acquired 3/4 of an acre of land, and we built that Kwame Ture Education Center ourselves. Some people are even wrestling with belief in how we did it. You don't have to believe in how we did it. We have to believe in ourselves in order to do it. And I believe that if on the ground level, on the grassroots level, we make the right connections and networking with each other, as we're doing with the 9 ministries in the Black Agenda Project, we can be successful in each doing our part. I have a part, you have a part, all of us have a part. But the part that too many of us play is that we sit back and we blame either the government or the police or the gang members or the youth or the prisons. We lay blame and we don't do our part. So I am simply doing my part. So I know there are those who agree with me and give me that spirit of encouragement to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm deeply appreciative of them. But to those who disagree, you just examine the track record and pattern of 3 decades of relentless sincerity in doing this work. And if anything that I've said is not true, then point it out to me. My mantra has been recently that if you don't like what I'm saying, but it's true, if you don't like it, leave me alone. Right? If it's true, leave me alone. But if what I'm saying is untrue, then point it out to me and I will correct it and I will come and join you in whatever you are trying to do, but we have to work together. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts, share these ideas. It has been a great experience for me, and I look forward to whatever opportunity we may have again in the not too distant future.
Excellent. Thank you so much for such a broad perspective and kind of shifting a lot of the views that persons have when it comes to crime being centralized to particular areas without the cultural and environmental impacts that has led to it being that. And if the system that created that structure still exists, and who is to change it if there is any intention to change it. But we do have a number of persons that are on our webinar who want to make a contribution.
Yes.
So at this point, we're gonna allow our administrators to unmute some of those persons so that they can ask their question to you directly or just make their contribution.
Yeah.
I think the first person we have is Trelicia St. John, if I did pronounce that correctly. And you can, she would be unmuted so that she can contribute to the discussion as well.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Dr. Mohammed, I just wanted to, not a question, but I listen to you from time to time, probably not often enough. And I just want to say thanks for coming in this space. Thanks for accepting this invitation and continue to do what you're doing to inspire parents, to inspire young persons. And bit by bit, I mean, people are open to their own options and decisions. So your objectives are clear and the information is there. It's just for us to follow or to either disregard. Again, it's a personal decision. And for me, I say thank you for sharing and continue to do as much as the Almighty allow you to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your encouragement. I deeply appreciate it.
We even have a contribution. Oh, sorry, I missed that. Yes, I was just about to allow Camille to join the discussion.
Yes. Dr. Mohammed, thanks for your insights. I was the one that was, I think, asking so many questions. But I find it very interesting, the discussion. And I think it registered for me when you said that you wanted to have schools you're responding to your cultural need, because you said you wanted to have schools of Black excellence, and that was not done. And then you went on to say, and I've spoken because of what I do, I've spoken to quite a few children. So yes, it's in keeping with what you're saying. There seems to be a negativity. And I kept saying to myself, it's not good for children, teenagers of any race, but we're talking about the Black race here, to constantly feel that there's so much negativity associated to their grouping. It's not good. All right. And so we'll have to work on that until we get more media presence or whatever. We'd have to work on that in the homes. I would say to the homes, let's be speaking more positive about our children, because outside right now, it's there is a kind of hostile way in where there's a lot of negativity. So then within the home, we have to ramp up that. But I'll say, coming from Jamaica, I like the question that was asked about Tobago, because I find this interesting. So 90% of us are Blacks in Jamaica. And we predominantly, between rich Blacks, middle class, and poor, we predominantly rule the school system, because most of the other groups, not all, but I'll dare say, by about 14, they've sent them off the island. And they say they make no apology for it, because the kind of education that we are still holding on to in our countries, they don't feel that their kids will be able to grow their business on that kind of education. And also the rich worries about their boys, and so after a certain age they will send them away off the island. That's just the truth. So it seems there's a common thread with the school system then, because I'm a Jamaican living in Trinidad and Tobago. And while I'm not bashing the school, I know we all are part from this of the system. And so it's all of us that it takes to look at what's good, to keep what's good, but to also work at improving, because the school is a marriage with the family. We have often heard that the family is at fault, but we're all out of families. So we're blaming ourselves. But if the school in any society, they talk about constantly needing to revamp and to change their school system. Some way we hesitate in the Caribbean. I don't know why, but there are structures in the school that makes children very sad. And even for those who have scored. So we have children who have scored high and dropped into mental ill health, suicide, and all of that. So we don't want to make, anytime we swing the pendulum and we say in Jamaica, it's only the poor, we were poor and we made it through the school system. Then if we think it's only poor people not doing well in school, then we don't fix it. Now I see here living in Trinidad that it becomes a racial discussion now, not a socio-economic discussion. But what's the common thread down? If we're using the very word education, and we in the Caribbean say we are passionate about education, then let's fix our education system, because that's a common thread for Trinidad, for Tobago, and for Jamaica. And when you read the literature for other countries, and I lived in Sweden for 2 years, and that's what changed my career and my whole trajectory. When you listen to the rhetoric in other countries, they know if school does not deliver, school is supposed to be a safety net as well, not just an academic machine. So if school is not delivering and you come from a challenged family, you have no hope. That's why we need to change. And black children, and I have nothing against any other group, I'm agreeing with you totally. You have to look at where the problem is. Black children need to hear more positivity about themselves in Trinidad and Tobago, because I come from a country that talks about a man went to prison, or so many people went to prison. You don't hear the term a black person went to prison, because just basically predominantly one race. So the dynamics are a little different. But surely, whether you're Caucasian, Chinese, Indian, or black, if you have a school system that is not meeting the growing needs and following the neuroscience and following children's development and putting the child at the central and not the curriculum and the exam, you're going to have at the teenage stage rich kids harming themselves, rich and middle class kids harming themselves and also failing. And you're going to have those who are very needy harming others. The literature is clear around the world. So then the Caribbean, we have to look at our school system without getting nervous. And it's government, it's not a particular government, it's not a particular minister. It is we, the people, who have to examine our school system as harsh as we examine the family, and give the figures over so that we can make the changes we need in this new modern world, because we value education. So let's a lot of what you said, yes, people might say, oh, this is, but it's the truth. So it makes sense to me that we are trying to respond to culture to say, okay, how am I going to help a particular grouping? If each grouping says, I am doing well, then every grouping must feel they're doing well and respond to what their grouping needs while living in harmony, is what I would suggest.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much,
Camille. Very insightful, and I like the fact that you brought and you drew reference to the Jamaican context and the specific similarities there with it being a predominantly African society. And so that even in those societies, using the race dynamic it's a bit touchy, but it's different because, we are predominantly one race, but we see that the traces of history still have a huge impact on how we are functioning. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, there are so many more questions that we could take and continue this discussion all up to 9 o'clock. But unfortunately, we do not have the time for that this evening. But we would be able to hear more from even Camille herself, because she would be hosting one of the discussions. Actually, she is the next speaker in line. So we'll be hearing more about the Jamaican context and similarities with Trinidad and Tobago, some of the historical impact that that has, but we know that she's going to be touching a lot on education and what's happening in the home and the psychological impact of the conversations we have and how that lead to increase in positive identity in youth and therefore leading to better academic performance and social performance. So the idea of it beginning in the home as well, but also maintaining the idea of looking at crime and violence as a public, in the context of a public health approach. And now you really don't want to miss this one, because this one's going to be a power-packed session, and my colleague Xavier Edwards would be hosting this on November the 26th. Now, that is next week, Tuesday. I would be back on December the 3rd, and I will be speaking with Dr. Ulrich Johnson. He is in the USA. And listen, that discussion is going to be quite interesting, looking at some of the policies that he implemented in the United States and some of his recommendation for what can be done to have a similar positive, successful impact on gang violence, homicide, murders, right here in Tobago. Guys, I want you to remember that this conversation, again, is part of a 4-part series, with the first episode taking place last week, Tuesday, where the discussion was had with Mr. Quincy Joseph. Today, we had an amazing power pack conversation with Dr. David Mohammed, and we know that he is a pro upliftment of the African persons of African descent, and how we show up in society, and understanding that outside of praying to our God, we have to get up and really create strategies that would set us apart for success, but not just success, for excellence, that thing that they call Black excellence. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a production from the Tobago Civil Net. And again, the Tobago Civil Net is a non-partisan organization based here in Tobago. It is a civil society organization that brings together different individuals from all walks of life, all types of organizations, businesses, political persuasions, all coming together to share a perspective and trying to echo an accurate sentiment of what the people of Tobago are saying that they need and they want, and how they feel, and truly feeling the pulse of the people. So again, be sure to like the Tobago Civil Net page to continue to follow on for more, not just of the Turning the Tide on Crime series, but there are other things that will be coming to the forefront. And so you have a responsibility to stick with the organization and support in whatever way you can or whatever way you want to. You can also go to the page, submit a message if you are interested in being a part of all that Tobago Civil Net is doing here on the island of Tobago. If you do have ideas and opportunities for synergistic collaborations, we are open to those. And just a reminder that today has been successfully brought to you courtesy Eastern Credit Union. Ladies and gentlemen from all over the world and on all different times, we want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for submitting your questions. Thank you for your likes and your shares and your comments. You have truly made this evening's discussion a hearty one. So again, I want to say thank you and have a great evening.
But in a minute could get real scary. Open your eyes. Let me tell you where we come from. Trinidad and Tobago Islands. And we not even Jamaican, but the dancehall scene, yeah, we shut down. And everything, yeah, irie. But in a minute could get real scary. Anywhere we go now, missing people on the news, and the boy them on the floor now. Blood running, can't stop it. Flow, boy gunning, small rocket. Woo, black life and a small topic. No, police outside, they not stop it. No, try tell me that is part of it. No. And I want to share with you tonight. Share with you tonight. There's still beauty in our eyes. Open your eyes. Let me start with the roots where we come from. Africa, brought to a paradise island, Bago. Peaceful people, but real radical. Warrior, heart clean, pretty like a rainbow. Link up with a sister isle named Trinidad, West Indian, beat the pan. I know you know the name though. Come and take a lime and a wine for carnival. Have a lemonade and unwind in Tobago. In Tobago. Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago.